all about primary foods and how, so what they are, first and foremost, and how imbalance in one or more of your primary foods can cause imbalances in your overall health and well being. Super powerful today, okay? So, there are four primary foods that we're going to dive into. And primary foods are your relationships, physical activity, spiritual connection, and career or life purpose. And they're different from regular food, right? So then we have our regular food as well. So it's important to look at the balance of your primary foods and your secondary foods or regular foods. Food, right? And nutrition and hydration is key, right? So I love my superfoods. I'm always talking about superfoods because they're so powerful. Nutrition and hydration are foundational. And over the next few weeks, we'll be diving into each of these aspects, nutrition and hydration, so regular foods or secondary foods, as well as the primary foods. And again, those are relationships, your physical activity, your spiritual practice or connection, and your life purpose. So the health of your relationships is really key, right? Because if one or more of your relationships are out of balance, it can cause imbalances in one of the other three primary foods or in regular food intake, regular intake of food, liquids, substances, because you're trying to manage something, right? And so if your primary relationship is in the toilet, you might be managing that stress, soothing the stress, soothing the emotional imbalance and that disconnect with, maybe you overexercise, maybe you undereat or overeat, maybe you develop a substance abuse issue because of that imbalance, right? So it can manifest and show up in different ways when that primary relationship is out of balance. And so the health of your relationships is super important, right? And I include in that the relationship you have your entire life, and that is with yourself. Okay, so it's good to have work on your relationship with yourself and have nurturing, nourishing relationships. Physical activity. So, physical activity includes movement, breath work, and stretching. And you want to have a balance of these elements, right? You want to have a balance of movement, so adequate movement, so that you're getting enough exercise and activity, because we're spiritual beings in a physical body, right? And our bodies need to move. And they also need to stretch. They need to have that yang energy of movement and activity. And they also need that yin element or quieting, stretching practice. And breath work, I include breath work in with physical activity or breath regulation, because if you've ever done an extended breath practice, pranayama practice, if you've ever done that, you know it is work. It is active, okay? And you might even feel some soreness after certain types of breath work. So it's important to have adequate movement and stretching and breathing in regard to that physical activity primary food. And it's really, really, really essential that you enjoy it. Because if you don't, then you're going to come up with an excuse or a way out of it. Okay? So it's important to choose something that you enjoy. Spiritual connection or spirituality, your connection to the divine, to your higher power. And we need regular, consistent, enriching spiritual practice daily. Okay, it's just as essential, this primary food of spirituality is just as essential as nourishing your body and drinking enough water, getting enough movement, and having healthy relationships, right? And so your relationship with the divine, your connection to the divine, it's important to connect every day, or at least consistently. And an absence of that, absence of connection, can cause you to feel lost and, or ungrounded, even lost, ungrounded. And it may create other imbalances in other areas of those primary foods, as I just mentioned. Your career or life purpose, your dharma, is the health of that is important too, right? And as part of that, it needs to be a balanced energetic exchange. And so what I mean by that is you're not just giving out and not receiving anything back. So it's important that you're receiving as much as you're giving out. So it's balanced. And having a fulfilling career and a clear vision of your life purpose, what you came into this life to do, the work you're here to do in Earth School, on this beautiful planet we've chosen to incarnate upon, is really, really important. And it's also key that your compensation is adequate. Okay? Because if it's not, that energetic compensation of money, of income, if that is not there, then you'll start to feel drained. Or if you're in a soul-sucking, energy-draining job with a lot of toxic people around, then that can create imbalance in one or more of those primary foods, or in your secondary foods, your regular food. Okay? Or you might develop substance abuse issues. And when, one of my teachers, where I learned about primary foods years and years ago, is Joshua Rosenthal of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, where I studied. And Joshua says, when you're filled up on primary food, regular food becomes secondary. So if you have some disordered eating patterns going on, you might look at your primary foods, and you might also look at what regular foods are you taking in. Are those themselves creating the imbalance? And this is exactly what I do when I work with people in my coaching programs, is we look at your primary foods, and we also evaluate the health of your regular foods. All of those are factors. All of those are really key to assessing. And so the first step is that awareness, like taking an inventory of the health of your relationships, including the relationship you have with yourself. Taking an inventory of your physical activity. Are you getting adequate movement? Are you moving too much? Are you over-exercising? I went through a period of time where I was managing my stress, and part of my stress was I was in a very stressful work situation, and I was having difficulty in my marriage. And I was also had some spiritual disconnect. So I had a lot of imbalances going on, and I was managing that with running. And I was never even interested in running. But I took up running and really went for it, did some marathon stuff and everything, but really was overdoing it. And as a result of that, I my spirit found a way out. I developed an injury and I couldn't run anymore eventually. Okay. So, over exercising is be aware that it can be under or over on any of these things, overdoing or underdoing. So, do you need more stretching? Are you moving enough, but do you need more stretching? Do you have a connection to your breath? And have you ever tried pranayama or breath work? It's very, very, very powerful. Um, and what I do now for my physical activity actually improves the health of my other primary foods. It's actually what I do for all my primary foods, and that is the practice of yoga. Because yoga is, you have the physical element, physical practice, asana practice, the poses of yoga, the breath work, you have meditation, so you get some spiritual connection. You're improving your relationship with yourself by getting on your mat. And then for me personally, as a yoga teacher, 500-hour yoga teacher, it is my, part of my career, my life purpose to help guide others back home, back to themselves, and improving the flow of energy through body, mind, and spirit, and as well helping people raise their energy and connect consciously to their higher power. Imbalanced primary foods. Well, before I go into that, this is so a few years ago, let me see if I can hold this up and still see the camera. I'll just hold it up. So I got to see it too. A few years ago, the USDA, Department of Agriculture, redid the food pyramid. The food pyramid went through an evolution, and then some brilliant person came up with the food plate. Ah, which makes a lot more sense since we often use a plate when we eat. And so you want to have adequate whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and protein, water, fats, and oils. And then what we've done here, Institute for Integrative Nutrition, is we've added the primary foods on the plate as well. So relationships, physical activity, spirituality, and career, which I like to call life purpose, because career feels so 1950s to me. And our careers can change, right? But our life purpose can stay the same. Our life purpose can stay the same, but that how we interface with the world and create income for ourselves, that can change. I used to be a dinosaur paleontologist for over 20 years, and then when it became clear that I needed to do something different, because I was working with the federal government doing confidential informant work for the federal government. There's a lot of black market sale of fossils, especially in Montana, going right across the Canadian border. The banditos run stuff across the border all the time. Guns, drugs, money, and fossils. Sold on the black market, sold illegally to private buyers. It's illegal to sell fossils from federal or state lands. Now, you can sell them from private lands, but you must have the permission of the landowner who owns the actual fossils. And so we were investigating one of my professional colleagues, Nate Murphy, who was illegally selling fossils from federal, state, and private lands, and making some cash under the table, right, while posturing as a legitimate professional paleontologist. And so part of the stress was, I know this person, and here I am on the investigation team, like that show Bones, where it's a special agent and then a scientist, a woman working together. That was my situation. And so this special agent was also an armed guard. We would go out to the sites that had been excavated illegally. I would document the state of the site, map it, take pictures, etc. If the fossils had been seized or recovered, I would let them know, like, what do you have? What's here? What's the potential value on the black market, etc. So, very stressful. I was asked to carry a firearm. I didn't want to do that, so I was wearing a knife all the time, and I'm just not really a weapons person. Um, but and then close to the trial, like about a week before the trial, the Special Agent Madsen died, and I got 3 different explanations for his death. I still don't really know why he died. Um, so it I was managing the stress of that, my career, and my marriage was struggling. Okay, so there's another primary food that was having issues. My spiritual connection was not fulfilling, and my physical activity that's the time when I was running a lot. Okay. And then substances came in as well. So I was drinking, I quit drinking, and then marijuana came in. And so I was, unbeknownst to me, marijuana is a very dangerous substance, as is, any form of excessive THC use. It takes me into severe cycles of manic depression, but I didn't know that at the time, because the word on the street is that marijuana is safe and effective to use. It's just a plant, right? That's not true for me, and it's not true for about 1 out of every 10 people. It takes me into very dangerous cycles that ended up taking me deep into depression, so deep that I considered taking my own life and had a suicide attempt. So you can see how things can get out of balance. One thing can be out of balance, and it can cause other things to be out of a balance, and then before you know, like, all your primary foods and your regular foods, and maybe you've got a substance abuse issue like me, everything's effed up, right? So it's important to check in with yourself about the health of the primary foods and your regular foods. So make an assessment, take an honest look, and identify weak areas, strong areas. With those weak areas, consider, how might I improve those? And we're talking about simple, actionable steps. Okay, sometimes we set that bar really high for ourselves, like, I'm going to do yoga 7 days a week, 60 minutes, 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. Well, if you're not doing any yoga right now, that's a little too high of a bar, okay? So what I invite people to do oftentimes, once you've assessed the health of these primary foods, again, relationships, physical activity, spiritual connection, and career, life purpose, as well as your nutritional and hydration intake. And if you have any other extraneous substances, take an honest look. Be honest with yourself. Am I overusing these? Am I drinking every night, etc.? And see where you're at, and then consider what would be small, doable steps. I like 3 minutes. Everybody can do 3 minutes. Sometimes 5 is too much or too long, right? But 3 minutes of meditation, 3 minutes walk. It's not, you wouldn't even go that far, right? But it's better than nothing. And 20 minutes, we'll talk ourselves out of that, right? It's too big of a time block. So start with 3 minutes of something is one recommendation I often give people. And once you get consistent with that 3 minutes, then you can start to increase it. So create that consistency first, and identify small, actionable steps that you can take with each of these primary foods, as well as your regular foods and hydration. Your water intake is super important. You want to be drinking, whatever you weigh. You take what you weigh and you divide that in half, and that's the baseline number of ounces of water that you want to take in every day. If you live in a hot climate, exercise, drink caffeine, you want to increase that accordingly, okay? So start with that as your baseline. Let's see here. Some of the effects, the adverse effects that can be created, which I just told you about through my story, but well, the follow up to that was I ended up once I was coming out of that stretch, my body caught up and I manifested cancer, polycystic kidney disease, because I was telling my body I don't want to be here anymore. You know, all the stress and everything was, you know, these are the messages my body was receiving. And the physical can be the slowest to change of the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, right? Those others move faster because they're not in the physical, in the 3D. But you could potentially manifest dis-ease like me if these primary foods and regular foods are out of balance. And imbalanced primary foods leads to stress. It can lead to anxiety, depression, and we're all free from this. Eating disorders, either overeating, undereating, bulimia, things like that. It can lead to weight gain or weight loss. And I don't have my glasses on. Let me see what this last thing says. It can lead to skin issues. Skin is the largest organ on the physical body. So that was one of my symptoms during that whole stretch, was I had really bad acne. I was really thin because I was exercising so much. I had really bad acne, and it can lead to chronic fatigue. So I also was very fatigued. So then I was bringing in more caffeine, which was not helping, right? So take an honest look. I invite you to take an honest look at your primary and secondary foods and identify those action steps. And rather than trying to change everything at once, pick one thing a week to work on or one thing a day to add in so that you don't get overwhelmed, and you can create that consistency first, and then you can build on that foundation. You want to build a foundation first and then start to put the walls up and the roof and all that, decorate the inside, do the landscaping. So build your house from the ground up and then flesh it out from there. That is what I have for you today about all about primary foods. Thank you for being here.